grabbed the last bag of BBQ chips off the shelf, but two kids snatched it from my hands and held it high over their heads. I was 4'2" and officially a midget, so when I jumped for it, I barely reached their shoulders. They pulled out their phones. "Go on, little man, jump," and hysterically laughed. My face burned with shame, but I kept jumping because these chips were discontinued. I had driven to 13 stores for this last bag, and nothing was stopping me from getting them. They waved it over my head for the 10th time, but then a hand came from the sky. A 7-foot man was holding the chips up over punks' heads, his phone out. "Go on, jump for it." They jumped but couldn't even reach his chest and stormed off embarrassed. I smiled up at him, but he was already looking at the label. Barbecue, my favorite. He opened the bag right there and literally stepped over me to keep walking. I swung as hard as I could and missed by so much I almost spun out of the box. It was the bottom of the 9th. We had a runner on third, 2 outs, down by 1. The ump dropped into his squat behind me. "Just put the ball in play, kid." I looked up at my dad in the bleachers and winked. "I'm hitting this one over, Dad." He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Send it, bud." The next pitch came in slow and right down the middle. I swung as hard as I'd ever swung in my life, and the ball cleared the fence by 10 feet. I dropped the bat and started running. Rounding first, I looked up at the bleachers to find my dad. He wasn't standing up. He was supposed to be standing up. He was the loudest one in the bleachers, and now he was just sitting with his hand on his chest. My mom was right next to him watching me through her phone, screaming, "Run, run, run." Second base. Dad still wasn't moving. By third, I was barely running. He fell forward over the bleacher rail, and I stopped halfway between third and home. "Dad!" I dropped the helmet and started running off the field toward my dad. The ump had my dad on the ground, pumping his chest with both hands. I fell to my knees and grabbed my dad's hand. My mom was on the phone with 911, screaming our address. 5 minutes later, the ambulance pulled up, and the paramedics got him on a gurney. As they were loading him in, his eyes opened and found mine. I saw it, bud. His grip tightened on my hand. I've never been prouder. Then they slid him in, and the doors closed. I hit the only home run of my life, and my dad lived to see it. He keeps the ball on his nightstand. I was sitting in class when a Smurf walked in. It was my professor, painted head to toe blue with a white hat and everything. Half the class started laughing. He didn't react at all. He just set his bag down and started teaching like nothing was different. The girl next to me leaned over and whispered, "It's Smurf Day." I asked her what that meant. She just looked at me and said, "You'll see." After class, I grabbed one of the older students and asked him what was going on. He sat me down on a bench outside and told me the whole story. A few years back, the professor had a 3-year-old daughter. She was diagnosed with a rare brain disease and spent most of her life in a hospital bed. The Smurfs was her favorite show. Every night after his last class, he'd drive straight to the hospital and sit in the chair next to her bed and watch it with her. She'd rest her head on his arm, and they'd watch every episode together until she fell asleep. He was a single dad. He couldn't stop teaching because that's how he paid for her treatment. So every morning, he'd leave her in that hospital room and walk into a classroom and pretend he was fine. He'd come in with red eyes, and nobody said a word. Eventually, some of his students found out what was happening and put together enough money for him to take time off. He got to spend her last few weeks with her because of them. She passed away 3 days after his last class. Every year on her birthday, he walks into class painted blue from head to toe. He never explains it. He never talks about it. He just teaches the whole lecture looking like a Smurf because it was the last thing that made her smile. I was 12 and starving when I threw a chain over the electric fence around Mr. Hatch's apple tree. Sparks shot up everywhere and the wires went dead. My little sister was watching from under the bridge with Tommy and 4 others, gripping the moldy loaf we'd been splitting for 3 days. Mr. Hatch's porch looked down on that bridge. All week he'd been on it biting into apples and yelling at us. "These apples are the sweetest in town, rats. You'll never know." Tonight I was going to know. I climbed over and tiptoed across wet grass toward the tree. A stick snapped under my foot loud enough to wake a graveyard. I froze, but the house stayed dark. 3 steps later, motion lights flooded the whole yard. A door slammed open, and Mr. Hatch came charging out in his bathrobe. "Get your hands off my apples, you little rat." I sprinted to the tree, jumped onto the lowest branch, and climbed as fast as I could. He came barreling across the grass with his head craned up at me, and caught his foot on the chain I'd thrown across the wires. He flew shoulder first into the trunk so hard the whole tree shook. An apple the size of my fist dropped straight down and clocked him on the forehead. He went face down in the grass and didn't move. I whistled twice from up in the branches. Tommy was first over the fence with the rest piling in behind him. They stood under the tree with shirts held open while I dropped apples down until every shirt was full. Mr. Hatch woke up to bare branches. Under the bridge that night, my little sister got the biggest one, and we ate until our stomachs hurt. Turns out he was right about one thing. They really were the sweetest in town. My principal tried to shut down my silly band's business 4 times before he gave up. At recess on Monday, a first grader handed me $1, and I peeled the glow-in-the-dark unicorn off my wrist and dropped it on his. Behind him, a dozen more kids were waiting their turn, all holding quarters. A second grader tried to trade me a half-eaten Reese's, and I told him cash only. By Friday, I had more.
Every coffee, a new world. Every sip.
I had more cash than my babysitter made in a week, and Mr. Doyle was watching me from across the playground with his arms crossed. The next day, I was in math class when I heard Mr. Doyle on the intercom. Effective immediately. No silly bands are permitted in the classroom. I rolled my stack into my pencil case before he finished talking. At recess, I sold from the bathroom line while he prowled the playground checking wrists. The next day, he was back on the intercom. No silly bands are permitted anywhere on school property. After the bell, I set up shop on the sidewalk 6 inches past the school gate. Kids poured out and lined up while Mr. Doyle rushed to the property line, gripping the fence as every dollar went into my pocket. A couple days passed, and I was sitting on the couch when my mom answered the phone, and I heard Mr. Doyle's voice. "Your son is running an unsanctioned business outside our school, and I need you to put a stop to it." She covered the phone and turned to me. "How much have you made?" I held up the wad and told her $92. She got back on the phone and said, "Sounds like he's learning," and hung up. Then that Friday, Mr. Doyle stood at the gate watching me set up the line. He didn't say anything, didn't take notes. He just shook his head, turned around, and walked back inside. The next morning, he stopped me in the hallway. I tightened my grip on my arm because I figured he was finally taking my stash. He pulled a wrinkled dollar bill out of his pocket. "My daughter wants the glow-in-the-dark mermaid." I slid it off my wrist and put it in his palm. "Cash only." Eric opened my snack cabinet and groaned, "There's no snacks in here." I stared at the Pringles, the ice cream, the Doritos, and chocolate candies. "What do you mean there's no snacks?" Eric looked at me with red eyes and a goofy smile. "I'm on the munchies, bro. I want Cheetos. The only open store is a 90-minute walk. Just eat the Doritos." Eric slammed the cabinet closed. "I want Cheetos, dude." I groaned and put on my jacket. We stepped outside and Eric rubbed his hands. "The walk will go quickly, dude. Trust me." But 5 minutes and heavy rain started pouring. My hair got wet and my pants immediately became drenched. "Eric, let's turn back. You don't even have a jacket." But Eric smiled and put his arm around me. "The longer the path, the louder the crunch, bro." I gave in and continued, my shoes squelching with every step. But then we reached the most dangerous street in the city. Maps showed this was the only way. And when I looked back, I saw a sketchy man in a hood behind us. I felt my heartbeat in my throat and instantly tapped Eric's shoulder. "Let's go home. Someone's following us." But Eric just kept walking, smiling to himself and thinking about the Cheetos. I turned around and saw the man closer now. I caught a glimpse of the knife in his pocket and the paranoia kicked in. "Eric, dude, he's behind us. He's got a knife. We have to go, man. We have to go." Eric simply turned around and stared right at him. "Him? Nah, he's just vibing. Just focus on the Cheetos, bro." He turned back around, and I began leading us down the weirdest turns and alleys until we finally lost him. I asked Eric to just call an Uber home the whole way, but he kept assuring me the Cheetos would be worth it. We finally reached the store and stepped inside, wet and soaking, my hands shaking because we'd nearly been killed. Eric walked to the Cheetos and picked them up. He looked at them closely, then shook his head. "Actually, ma'am, I don't really want these." He put them back, and I flailed my arms in anger and disbelief. Eric grabbed my shoulder. "Bro, they were $2. I'm not paying $2. I can just eat the Doritos back at your place." My friend Darren laced up his new Jordans and pumped his fist in the air. "Now I can jump like Jordan." I held back my laugh. "No disrespect, Darren, but you're 350 pounds. You can't jump like Jordan." But he looked past me, and his eyes settled on the rim like he was ready to soar. "If I hang on that rim, you owe me $100. I instantly shook his hand, ready to collect the easiest money of my life. Darren walked under the rim and rubbed his new shoes. Just like MJ, baby. He squatted down and jumped as high as he could. His arms stretched through the air, and he almost touched the net. His face deflated, and he looked at his new shoes like they'd betrayed him. "Told you, dude. Now give me my $100. I walked over, but Darren walked past me. "I'm going to touch that rim." He dragged a chair from one side of the gym to under the hoop. Then he stacked another. He stacked 4 chairs until they reached the rim, then put his foot on the first one. "Darren, are you seriously? I want to be like MJ," he interrupted. The chairs creaked and a leg splintered as he climbed, and I looked away because I couldn't watch him fall. But he reached the top and grabbed the rim with both hands. "Told you I could jump like Jordan." He hung on the rim, but then the mount of the rim cracked. I froze, and Darren's face dropped as we heard another crack. I'm getting down, but right as he put his foot on the chair, a spiderweb crack shot across the glass. The whole backboard exploded, and Darren fell backwards, clutching the snapped rim. He bounced off the chair pile and dropped to the floor. I ran over. "Oh my God, Darren, are you okay?" He smiled with his front tooth missing. "I don't think I can jump like Jordan, but at least I can break backboards like Shaquille O'Neal." He reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet while still on the floor. "What? I touched the rim, didn't I? My dad came home beaming, saying he'd just met a guy in a black coat and a top hat who showed him how to hypnotize himself. He immediately turned the TV to a dead channel and sat 2 feet from the static, reading the instructions. Watch static for 30 minutes. Cover your eyes and listen to the static for another 30 minutes. When the hour is up, you'll be hypnotized for 4 hours. My dad raised his finger and said, he told me anything I see during those 4 hours isn't real. I rolled my eyes and went to my room as he started watching the static. But then an hour passed and I heard the front door open. I froze because the man in a black coat and top hat was standing in the middle of our living room, holding an empty duffel bag. He started shoving our jewelry inside it, while Dad sat on the couch, staring at him and smiling peacefully. He said aloud, "Wow, the hypnotization is working." The man told me if I hallucinate him later, it means it worked. I couldn't believe it and lunged for my phone on the coffee table, but the man grabbed it and pulled a gun from his waistband. One wrong move and I shoot. Sit down. I sat frozen, with my hands shaking in my lap. I looked at my dad and he just smiled at me, like everything was fine. The shouting is very vivid. He warned me about the audio component. I stared in disbelief. My own dad was watching a stranger rob us and smiling about it. The man started unmounting the TV and I yelled, "Dad, he's taking the TV." Dad just smiled. "There is no TV. There is only peace." The man walked past Dad carrying the TV, and Dad reached out and patted the man's leg. Goodbye, hallucination. I pinched myself because I was sure I was dreaming, but my face dropped in horror because I wasn't. The man came back with my PlayStation and laptop. He leaned over Dad and slid the wallet out of his jacket pocket, then asked Dad, "How's the hypnotization?" Dad beamed, "Super realistic," and the man laughed. He walked across the room toward the side table where Dad's watch was. I was in shock, and the second his back was turned, I ran to Dad and slapped him hard across the face. "Dad, this is real. We're being robbed." But Dad smiled wider, his cheek going red. "Wow, the hypnotization is so cool. I can even feel pain as if someone actually slapped me." "Dad, he has a gun," I said, almost crying. Dad looked right at the man's gun, bliss on his face. He warned me the trance might include weapons. They aren't real either. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it. The man took the watch and zipped his loaded duffel bag. He walked past me, tipped his hat while laughing, and walked out the front door. I sat there shaking, looking at half of our house cleared out. Everything was silent except for Dad humming on the couch, smiling at nothing. 4 hours later, the timer beeped. Dad blinked and stretched his arms. "Wow, that was vivid," he laughed. "I even saw him take our TV. The mind is amazing." He sat up and looked at the wall where our TV used to be. His smile faded. "Son, where's our TV?" My dad would pat my shoulder and say, "This is the year, kid. I can feel it. Every Knicks playoffs for 25 years, and he died the summer before they finally made the finals. Now, it was the Knicks' first finals since 1999. So for the last game, I laced up my Timbs, pulled on my dad's old Ewing jersey, and flipped my Yankees hat backwards. Timbs in June and all. I got my son in his little Brunson jersey, lifted him onto my shoulders, and told him the same thing. He was wrong every time, all the way back to watching these same Spurs beat them in 5 games from his knee, but he never stopped believing. And this year was different, because we had Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, McCall Bridges, Cat Daddy, and the heart of the garden, Josh Hart. If you believed in miracles, you had to believe in these Knicks. So we shoved into Times Square with 50,000 other believers. My son gripped my shoulders every time the square went quiet. "Dad, are we gonna lose?" he asked, and I told him to watch. Brunson was hooping on the big screens, his name bouncing off the buildings, and my dad would have loved this kid. But the Spurs kept punching back, and the square turned desperate, strangers grabbing strangers, an old man praying into his hands. I gripped my son's ankles tighter with every swing, because if they lost, his first Knicks memory would be the same as mine. My heart was slamming in my throat, and I swear I heard my dad in the noise, saying it one more time. "This is the year, kid." The clock ran out, and I stopped breathing. The Knicks won it all. The square detonated, grown men crying, strangers screaming with joy, like the city had held its breath for 50 years and let it out. My son screamed above me, while I pressed my dad's jersey to my face and cried for the first time since his funeral. 25 years of believing, and the first time I said it for him, it came true. "You were right, Dad. This was the year." My friend Jeremiah looked into a kid's eyes in the hallway, and the kid instantly dropped to the floor. Jeremiah yelled, "I told you all I have magic powers. Who else wants to try?" None of us believed him, until Jeremiah pointed at another random kid. "You look at me." The kid turned around and looked into Jeremiah's multicolored eyes, then immediately slumped to the floor. Everyone looked at each other in disbelief, and a crowd immediately formed around Jeremiah. Every kid he made eye contact with fell to the floor, and only got up when he snapped his fingers. Word spread through the school immediately, but then during math class, Mr. Stevenson slammed his hands on the table. "Jeremiah, stop whatever stupid game you're playing. You're not a wizard, and you're distracting the other students. Jeremiah looked up from his desk and deep into Mr. Stevenson's eyes. Mr. Stevenson's own eyes suddenly rolled back, and he collapsed on the floor, knocking his cup of coffee onto his shirt. My jaw dropped, and we all pulled our phones out recording Jeremiah, because a real superhuman was in our class. Jeremiah just chuckled, and when I asked him how he does it, he smirked. I'm not from here. Our videos spread around our small town, and a newspaper even published an article, Local Boy with Mysterious Powers. That's when Jeremiah announced a live show, where he would make people collapse live if they doubted him. On the day, everyone gathered in the school auditorium, whispering and excited. Cameras and press were there, but when 4 p.m. hit, Jeremiah wasn't there. We waited a full hour, but Jeremiah never showed. One by one, everyone left, and the next day, Jeremiah wasn't in school. His mom answered the door and said Jeremiah hadn't been home since the night before. I sent him messages, but he never replied. He was just gone. Then 4 years later, I ran into him at a coffee shop. Jeremiah, is that you? He smiled like nothing happened.
Optic White Purple Serum with intense purple serum that instantly color corrects yellow tones for a shiny white smile.
Hi guys, I'm Nicholas.
Nothing happened. I asked him, so what happened with the live show and your powers? He laughed so hard he put his coffee down. I never had powers. I gave $1 to every person so they would drop. Even Mr. Stevenson. Once the videos were made, I knew the whole town would pay for tickets, so I took all the ticket money and bounced. I was in disbelief. No way, man. How much did you make? He smirked. $37 profit, dude. I looked into his eyes. He did all that for $37. It was my first day in my new foster home. I was going up the stairs when a kid shoved me and pushed me down. I had no idea who this kid was and fell down the whole flight. My ankle twisted on the last step, swelling up immediately. He walked down and stood over me. No one will ever love you, you parentless freak. He spat on me. I was about to get up to tell my foster parents when another foster kid pulled me aside. He's our foster parent's son, Ricky. It'll only get worse if you say something. He likes to bully all the foster kids. Try not to get killed by him. So I decided I was just going to stay out of his way, and that would be it. But the next morning, as soon as he saw me, Ricky threw a glass plate at my head and laughed. It shattered against my skull, and my head started bleeding. Blood was dripping down my face. I had to say something before he actually killed me, so I went to his parents. Your son just threw a plate at my head. I'm bleeding. His dad didn't even get up from the couch. Ricky said you fell. If you keep running your mouth, I'll call your social worker and have you moved somewhere that'll make you wish you were back here. I felt trapped and walked away shaking. Then I heard yelling coming from Ricky's room. I stopped at the door crack and listened. His mom was screaming at him. You think we wanted you? You were an accident and you've been a problem ever since. I stood there in shock. His own parents hated him. Then I looked up at the wall. There was a calendar. Tomorrow had a circle on it. Social worker visit. I knew exactly what I needed to do to get myself out of here. The next day, I knew the social worker was coming any minute. So I walked up to Ricky. You called me a parentless freak, but you have parents and they don't even love you. Ricky snapped and tackled me, punching me on the ground. That's when the front door opened. The social worker walked in and saw Ricky on top of me swinging. What is going on? Ricky froze. She pulled him off me and helped me up. That's when she saw my swollen ankle and the gash on my head. Who did this to you? The foster dad panicked and pointed at Ricky. It's him. He's the problem. This is why we don't love you. You mess everything up. The social worker looked at the parents and said, you guys should not be foster parents, and turned to me. Don't worry. I'll make sure you go somewhere safe. A month later, I walked into my new foster home. I saw Ricky looking broken in the living room. The kid who bullied foster kids became one. I was mid-lesson playing with my Gorilla Glue when an announcement blared. Lockdown, lockdown. This is not a drill. A gunshot echoed down the hall, and we all immediately ducked under the tables. I felt like I was going to pass out, and the kid next to me peed his pants. Our teacher tiptoed to the door, and his face went pale. He's coming to us. Everybody hide. He locked the door, but suddenly the handle started rattling. Open up. The shooter kicked our door, then kicked again, and I could see the wood around the handle start to splinter. My classmates were crying and praying with their hands together because the shooter was about to come in, and we had no way out. That's when I saw the teacher running to my desk. He grabbed my Gorilla Glue and ran back to the splintering door, shouting, "Smash the windows and leave. The door won't hold. It's been an honor teaching you." We grabbed our chairs and began smashing the windows as the kicking sound continued. And when I looked back, Mr. Rogers was pouring my entire tube of Gorilla Glue onto his palms. He was muttering something under his breath and shaking violently. He pressed his glue-filled palms to either side of the door and stood in the doorway like a human shield, looking at the sky like these were his last moments on Earth. The door splintered open right as I started climbing out, and I immediately heard gunshots. I turned back for just a split second, and my legs went numb because Mr. Rogers had been sprayed with bullets. His body was limp, but he was still blocking the doorway because of the Gorilla Glue on his palms. The shooter was pushing and trying to get into the classroom, but couldn't. I climbed out the window right as Mr. Rogers' body hit the floor. The shooter ran ran in, but we were gone. Mr. Rogers chose to never come home to his family again, just to make sure we could come home to ours. I walked into my high school reunion, and the first person I saw was the guy who used to make me eat pencil shavings in 8th grade, now in a cheap suit holding a warm beer. "Pencil boy," he yelled across the room, loud enough to turn heads. His name was Brandon, and in 8th grade he'd hold a number 2 pencil over my lunch tray and shave the wood off it with a box cutter until the shavings buried my sandwich. "Eat it," he'd say, and the whole cafeteria would chant it until I did. Now he was waving me over like we were old friends. I went because I didn't want to make a scene, and he threw his arm around my shoulder and pulled me into a circle of 3 guys from the old crew. "Look who showed up," Brandon said, and his hand clamped down on my shoulder. "So what are you doing with yourself these days?" I told him I worked in software. "That's cute, man. That's cute." The squeeze turned into a shake, like he was rattling a kid. My face went hot, and I stepped back out from under his arm, but he closed the space again. "You still live with your mom?" I told him I had my own place in Austin. He didn't like that, so he turned to his crew and got louder. "What do you even drive?" I told him a Porsche, and the guy next to him snorted beer out his nose. "What is it, a Matchbox?" Brandon said, and the whole circle cracked up. I let them laugh. When they were done, I told them I had to grab something from my car. Brandon and all 3 of his friends followed me out into the parking lot, still cracking Matchbox jokes the whole way. I clicked the key fob, and the lights on a black 911 Turbo flashed twice. Brandon stopped walking. "Dude," one of his
牙齿出现敏感的征兆，表示它外面的保护层磨损。
"Dude," one of his friends said, real quiet. I opened the door, reached into the center console, and pulled out a yellow number 2 pencil. I walked back over to Brandon and held it out. "You dropped this in 8th grade," I said. I kept it. He took it without looking at me, and his friends weren't laughing anymore. I got in my car and drove off while he stood there holding it. I was in the passenger seat of my girlfriend Tara's car when I turned to her and said, "I think we should break up." She kept both hands on the wheel and stared straight ahead without saying anything. Then she blew through a stop sign without slowing down. "Tara, that was a stop sign." She said nothing and pressed harder on the gas, and as I watched the speedometer climb, I put my hand on the door handle. "Pull over right now." She turned and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "If I can't have you, nobody can." There was a massive oak tree at the end of the road, and she was driving straight at it. If I didn't stop her, I was a goner. She ran a red light, and I heard horns blaring around us, and I started shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "Tara, please, you don't want to do this." She didn't say anything, and kept both hands locked on the wheel. The oak tree was getting close, so I grabbed the emergency brake between our seats and yanked it up, which made the car fishtail sideways. She screamed and reached down with one hand to shove the handbrake back down. Then she wrestled the wheel straight, and her foot went back to the floor. The tree was filling the entire windshield now. I reached across her body and grabbed the key and tried to pull it from the ignition, and she bit down on my hand so hard I yelled and let go. She looked at me with tears running down her face, her foot still flat on the floor. "I love you." She kept heading straight for the oak tree, and I threw myself back and braced with both hands on the dash. We crashed, and the airbags exploded into our faces with a sound so loud it stopped being sound and became ringing in my ears. I got out on shaking legs and walked around to her side. Tara was slumped over the steering wheel, and she wasn't moving at all. I stood there looking at her through the cracked window, then stepped back and called 911. The officer looked at the skid marks, then at the tree, and asked me what happened. I sighed. She didn't take the breakup well. I walked through our school's metal detector, and it started beeping rapidly. Security grabbed me before I could react and unzipped my bag, revealing a gun. I'd no idea how it got here, but they escorted me anyway. In the office, the principal put the gun on the desk and turned to make a call, but I noticed a small piece of paper tucked inside the trigger guard. I quickly slipped it out. "This gun is fake, but the bomb in the freshman girl's bathroom isn't. Say this gun is real. Say it's yours. You have until 11:15 to convince them, or I press the button." My stomach dropped. It was 11:06. I had 9 minutes, and I knew exactly who this was. Kieran, the IT kid who'd been harassing my freshman sister. This was his way of getting rid of me. The principal got off the phone, and an officer walked in. I was about to tell them about the note, until I saw a small microphone taped inside my bag. Kieran was listening. I couldn't show them the note, because Kieran did IT and had access to these cameras here. I had no way to tell the truth. The principal asked, "Where did you get the gun? What were you planning?" And I gave answers that sounded guilty, because my sister's life was more valuable. I had 7 minutes left to keep up the lie. But then the principal picked up the gun. "This is plastic." His face went red. "Why would you confess to bringing a real weapon when this is a toy?" I felt my blood go cold. I couldn't tell the truth. But before I could reply, the door opened. "Kieran, sorry. I heard something went wrong. Just wanted to make sure everything's going according to plan." His eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. The principal told him to go back to class, and he just left. The principal then suddenly leaned forward. Are you covering for anything? I felt my legs buckle. Why? Because confessing to a fake gun only makes sense if you want us looking at you instead of somewhere else. Like that kid who walked in. Strange use of words, according to plan. I realized he'd figured it all out. But if I admitted that everything would blow, he opened his mouth to talk again, somewhere else. Like that kid who walked in. Strange use of words, according to plan. I realized he'd figured it all out. But if I admitted that everything would blow, he opened his mouth to talk again. But then his radio crackled. A teacher asked if students could use the bathroom during lockdown. My sister needed to go. I stopped breathing. The principal replied, no, and I exhaled hard, but he caught it. Why did that matter to you? I went pale. Why did the bathroom matter to you? He asked again. I looked at the clock, 11:12. Because I need to use it. He stared at me. You think I'm dumb? I started coughing on purpose. Please, I'm going to be sick. The principal looked at me. Fine. The officer walked me out, and I spilled everything. The note, the mic and camera, the bomb. How we couldn't just set off the alarm because Kieran would hear and blow everything. The officer went white. We walked back in, and he whispered something to the principal. He got on his laptop and typed immediately. Within 20 seconds, students were evacuating in silence. The officer put on my cuffs to arrest me and walked me out at 11:14. By 11:15, all students were out, and Kieran never noticed as he was monitoring the office that showed me being arrested and listening for an alarm that never came. He was found with the